accessibility, as well as banking products and services to Brazos Valley citizens. First National Bank. First, always.
Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. Cal Boykin was born in New Mexico. He grew up in Big Spring, Aggie class of 1946, but like many, his actual graduation came after his World War II service as a proud member of the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion following Patton's Third Army through France and Belgium and Holland. Today we continue our visit with Sergeant Cal Boykin of College Station. Cal, it is wonderful to have you back, and just sort of by review for the people who might have missed last week, and I'm sorry that they did. 814th Tank Battalion. Again, you grew up in Big Spring, you went to A&M, you went into the service. You thought you were going to be in the Air Corps, but that got changed, right. And you had your training at Camp Hood and also at Camp Polk. Talk just a little bit about the tank battalions, what they were, and sort of what your missions were.
Well, they were really tank destroyer battalions. Which, and they look like tanks, and if you watch any documentary, about a third of those that you see are tank destroyers rather than tanks.
Right.
But
right.
So, and we've often said if we had a coaxial camera there showing the rounds we would, where we would knock out a tank, that we'd be more popular than the 8th Air Force. But it didn't work out.
Exactly.
No. But anyway, we were to destroy tanks, German tanks. The doctrine called for solid, be in reserve and then move up and hit that big task force or big frontal attack by all these heavy tanks. But it didn't work out that way. The Germans began to use fewer tanks. They had fewer tanks. And they used combined arms, infantry and artillery and tanks, and then air if they had it. And so we had to be integrated into infantry divisions or armored divisions. In our case, we were integrated into the 7th Armored Division after we landed in France.
Right. We talked last week about that you went over to England, you were trained at Packington Park, and then you went over, landed at Utah Beach, Normandy, about 2 months after D-Day.
Right.
And take us from there and your push. It was a rather quick push because you were following Patton, and he was always in a hurry. And your push through France and Holland and Belgium and on into Germany.
Right. Well, we, in fact, we went through the old World War I battlefields,
Really?
Our division took Chateau Thierry, for instance, Verdun, and on until we ran out of gas, just outran the supply. And so we had enough diesel for our M10s, that is our tank destroyers, but we couldn't go it alone.
Right.
And so we had to rest just for a little while. And this is when a truck showed up and took us over to one of the cemeteries at Saint Mihiel, American cemetery from World War I. And we visited and viewed it almost, and it was kept just like you'd see it today probably. Nicely mowed and green and all that.
Right.
And then we visited a trench of bayonets where the trench had caved down on these French infantrymen before they went over the top, and the bayonets still stick there.
Wow.
Now, I didn't see that personally, but others in my group did. I did see that.
Right. You were a sergeant on an M8 armored car, 37 millimeter gun, 30 caliber machine gun. I want to go to August the 18th, I believe it was, and a task force mission that you told me about. Talk about that.
Well, we were Combat Command A of the 7th Armored ordered us forward to take Rambouillet. Now, there was another College Station man, turned out later, Colonel Vernon Files. He was a lieutenant. He took another task force, but we went on the right-hand side, and he went on the left-hand side, and the big wall surrounding the Rambouillet Castle, the summer home of the French presidents,
Right.
We never saw the castle because we were worried what happened because some cavalrymen had been ambushed there the day before, and a number of them were killed. And one of the cavalrymen hollered up at us, "Watch that 88." And sure enough, it fired, missed us by inches, hit the wall. We backed into the wall. Of course, I was trying to see where it is. Where is that gun? It fired again, and I saw it. I don't think it was 88. Everybody thought all guns were 88s, but it was probably 75 maybe.
Right.
But it just traveled like a torpedo across that dusty, fallow field, and came right underneath us and went out through the wall. Well, I took aim and about ready to fire, and Marvin Mosier, the driver of Lieutenant Fuca's Jeep just ahead of mine, came back, and he was in the sights, so I had to hold back. And by that time, I'd lost any way of being accurate, so I just fired. And of course, the armor-piercing shell with a tracer, you can see it about 30 feet over. But at least it gave us time to get out of the line of fire. They fired a couple more times, but they were wild.
Right.
And I went back there, Rosemary and I did, in 97. And there's an American Eagle monument to all the soldiers who were killed. I think there were 9 in all at that ambush.
Right.
And one was a pilot. And I had seen that P-47 Thunderbolt go down. The flames coming out of the cowl, I could see the pilot just clear as day. He seemed to be unconscious, and it crashed. Well, the French took care of the body until the grave registration people could show. Francois wrote a history of the liberation of Rambouillet, and she managed to get people to come and for one of the ceremonies. They have 2 a year, one on D-Day and one on Liberation Day of Rambouillet. And included in that group was a sister of the pilot whose plane I had seen go down.
Wow.
And later on, she from Illinois, she was down in the valley for the winter, she and her husband. And I went and I visited, and we had quite a little session. I was the first person she had talked to who had remembered seeing the plane go down.
Wow.
And if it was any consolation, all I could say was, I think he never knew what happened when he was probably out.
It was important for her to know. That must have been an amazing experience for her to meet you.
Sure.
Indeed.
But there are a lot of coincidences in this business.
Indeed, there is.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what we're going to do right now. I want to go to some photographs right now because I've got a lot more that I want to talk to you about your service. But I want to go to some photographs, some of the ones we saw last week, so this will be by review. And we'll go ahead and go to those right now. We saw this one last week. We'll do it again for people who didn't see the show last week. This was taken at Camp Hood, is that right?
Right, North Camp Hood.
Right. And that's the patch of your unit. The 7 means is attached to the 7th Armored Division. Right. Okay, let's move on to the next photograph.
This was in Belgium near Spa, right after I got out of the field hospital with a hand infection. My right hand was pretty bad shape, but it's okay. And
this was the kind of weather that you hear people talk about at the Battle of the Bulge.
Right.
And this was the kind of snow.
That was it.
As this was like in February, right here. Okay, let's move on. This was the book that we talked about last week, the book about tanks, where that is actually a replacement tank that you found yourself on. You're in that picture. You're there in the top turret with the helmet sort of looking at the camera, and you didn't even know this picture had been taken until it showed up on the cover of the book.
Right. Well, we were looking pretty serious and pretty cold, I was.
Exactly.
But we were on a recon mission, and probably one of the first, after we had pulled out of St. Vith. St. Vith was the major stumbling block that the Germans had to get over if they could.
Right.
And anyway, Task Force Jones, we came out. I lost my armored car it crashed through the ice, and we were trying to set it on fire. Didn't work, and a German tank came up and finished the job, and we left.
Let's move on to the next picture because here's some new. Will Rogers Jr. was a member of the 814th. He was the same unit that you were in. And talk about him because he is somebody that you profile in your book. This is the son of the great American humorist Will Rogers.
Well, of course, he earlier had been elected to Congress. He had been in the Army, had a commission. He was serving, I think, at Camp Hood in the unit training center. But he was elected, and then he resigned his commission, went into Congress. Now, at Congress, he worked on the soldiers' voting bill, and then he did some other things about trying to bring the Jews of Eastern Europe into the U.S. using Jewish money, and those two bills completely failed.
Right.
And it didn't have the support from the State Department and I don't know what all. But anyway, he was demoralized, I gather, because that was when he resigned his seat in Congress and joined us while we were in England. He joined the 814th in Recon Company, commanding the 1st Platoon. I was in the 2nd Platoon.
Right. He later became an actor. Matter of fact, played his father in many movies and also was in television. I'm old enough to remember him when he was in television, and as a matter of fact, he's quite a resemblance to his dad, of course, also. Let's move on to the next picture. We'll talk more about Will Rogers later. This is a reunion picture. You are the third from the right or fourth from the left, whichever way you want to count. And I will say that you were a larger man back then.
I think so.
You're looking quite trim right now, I'll tell you that. Talk about this reunion picture and where it was taken.
Well, this was in Savannah, Missouri. And we didn't have reunions up until about, I guess 18 years ago. And then we had one every year. And believe it or not, they were organized and formed. The addresses were found and whatnot, notifications by the second section sergeant, Carol Christmas.
Right.
And I was the other section sergeant of 2nd Platoon. He held the reunions. I wrote the book. These two monkeys, we did our best for the 814th.
I know these were all great reunions, and these pictures are all in your book. Let's move on. I think we've got some more pictures. This is a picture that was taken at Camp Hood. When was this taken? And this is you standing in front of an M8 Armored car. This was your vehicle.
I guess a number of years ago, probably 20 years ago.
Right.
But it was the first cavalry museum, I believe. And the Tank Destroyer Museum artifacts are in the 4th Infantry Museum now. And there are some vehicles, the M18, the M10, and the 2 M10s.
Right. That was your vehicle there.
Right.
You knew everything about that.
That's right.
Here's you and Rosemary at one of the reunions. Where was that taken? Do you recall?
That would have been in 95. 95, I believe, because that's when I brought the book to distribute.
Right. Yeah. That's when you wrote the book. Rosemary, your wife, was 61 years.
Right.
And quite a career that she had also. We'll talk about her and your family a little bit later on. See if we have any more. Nope, that's it. That's all the photographs. I wanted to get those and get the people to see those because there's some other stories that I want you to tell. I want to make sure that you have time to tell this whole story because I think it's just a fascinating story. I want you to talk about, I'm just going to let you take it. I want you to talk about Annie and Theo.
Okay, when we moved from Metz with the 3rd Army, we transferred up to Holland and with the 9th Army and then with the 2nd British Army. And we were camped just outside of Maastricht. Now, Maastricht is an old Roman city. It's probably the oldest city in Holland. Right in the very south. Belgium on the border, Germany over here. It's a little different part of Holland, but it's a fine city. We got word that they were going to, the girls, English-speaking girls of Maastricht were going to hold a dance for 7th Armored boys, Well, I went to the dance. Most of my platoon and people I knew were married and they didn't care about this sort of thing at that time. And so I went and I visited last week that hall, the Grand Theater, where the dance was held. Mirrors on the wall, chandeliers, I had washed my clothes in gasoline and getting ready to go, and here I showed up in that environment. It was completely different. And here was Annie in her blue dress and so on. And I danced with her probably all evening, and then she asked me to come and visit her and her family mother and father, 2 brothers, and her father was a chef. Now I can relate to that, being in the hotel business, and we had a lot of things to talk about. Her mother was German, but she talked to me constantly and made me understand what she wanted. She was quite a lady, but I almost missed her because the way she gave 31, I thought it was 37. You know how they make a 1, and I almost missed her. And a couple of GIs said, "Well, that's 31, not 37." So I went back and.
So you
anyway,
almost had the wrong address.
Yeah, and we visited quite a long. Several times I'd get to leave, and then we were gone. And when we were called back down into the Bulls on the 17th of December, why, I thought we were going to go through Maastricht, and I'd bail out and go see Annie, but but it didn't work out that way.
Right.
But I did visit her a number of times because after the war, we were in occupation. The 7th Armored went home. Hasbrook took his division home, left us in occupation. And I was taking a group to Brussels on leave. We stopped at the railway station in Maastricht, and I looked, and I said, "Hell, I'll see you boys in Brussels." And so I visited with Annie, and then I rendezvoused with them a couple of days later somehow.
Right.
But she was engaged to Theo Vromans. This was Annie Sanders. Theo Vromans. He was a engineer, safety engineer for the Dutch state mines in Haarlem, just north. And we used to go up to Haarlem for showers at least a couple of times in the mines.
Right.
And but I never met him. But he was an individual. He was talented. He played his guitar. He was there at the liberation of Maastricht on the 14th of September, had an American helmet on. I have a picture. He has this American helmet. His twin sister's sitting there in a Jeep with some GIs. And so, and of course...
You hadn't met him, but you had something in common, and that was Annie.
That's right. And he always reminded me, he says, "I won." But you know, of course, I started taking foreign assignments, and when that happened, we were able to come back through. And in 1970, we had our first visit with both Annie and Theo.
Right.
And it went well because we toured the Peel Marsh area in Holland where we fought, and we toured the Ardennes where we fought, St. Vit, Salm Chateau, where I lost my armored car, and Vilsum. And I was there last week, and we laid a few wreaths and so on.
Right.
And
it's interesting. Your daughter Ann emailed me this, talking about this, and she wrote, "Theo knew of the attraction, but stayed in the background, also feeling a sense of debt to the soldiers." So although he knew of the attraction, it was.
Well, see, Theo, when they closed the mines down, he became the public relations officer for the city. Now that's a pretty responsible job because the Queen comes and he makes the arrangements.
Right.
And then, as he said, the GIs come and they want to. Well, whatever happened to Helga?
Right.
And he says, "Well, Helga who? Well, I don't know, but she lived over." And he'd help trace down these, and then here comes Boykin.
Right.
Where's Eddie?
Right.
But anyway, he had a good sense of humor.
Right. And this was all before you met Rosemary.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And after you and Rosemary got married, the remarkable thing about this is that you all became friends.
That's right. We stayed friends.
The two couples.
Right. Now, sadly, Theo passed away at 99. Our 2 brothers have passed away, and 1 son had.
But talk about, before he passed away, what happened in 1989 involving the show Good Morning America.
That's right. The Good Morning America show came to Holland. I don't know where else they were going, but they interviewed a captain with the 30th Old Hickory Division, which liberated Maastricht, and they interviewed Theo. Well, Theo, you know, they would say, well, what a jubilant time it was, everybody singing, dancing, and everything. But Theo, no, he looks over to the trucks bringing the bodies to Margroton Cemetery for burial. And he had a few things to say about that. And he was very serious about these things. And he said the infantryman never smiled. He never saw. He said these others, even yourself, you smile every now and then.
Right.
And, but now one thing I might mention is in 1976, well, anyway, I'll continue this.
Right.
They asked him, well, are you still in touch with Americans? Oh, yeah. Calvin and Rosemary Boykin, College Station, Texas, 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion. And we got a tape of that because my son Clay called Phoenix, and they taped it over there because it's an hour later, and we have a copy of it.
Yeah. You and your wife were out of the country at the time of this, but your family had seen it because they were at your father's funeral in Austin at the time.
That's right. They had seen it that day, and the grandchildren, what they're talking about Cal, you know. I'm not Grandpa, I'm Cal, you know. That irritates some of our group, but I don't worry about it.
Right.
The Bostwick boys would take a torch and run it from Normandy all the way to Bostwick. On September the 14th, they would arrive and they would light that flame.
Right.
And so in '76, they flew to Washington, lit that torch and ran it down to Washington and put it on the steps of the Capitol in honor of our bicentennial.
Wow. Wow.
And then Theo came, visited us. I picked him up in Houston. I took him to the San Jacinto battlegrounds. I said, this is where the revolution was fought.
Right. The real revolution. I want you to talk about after your service and you came back to the United States and your beautiful wife Rosemary, because and when you met her and how that developed. In 61 years you've been married now.
I started back to A&M in Range and Forestry, and I was a sophomore. Rosemary was a senior at SMU, and she was going to become a medical artist, and she had combined things there in such a way that she could do that. And then she belonged to the sorority, and she had a big function going on. And my good friend in medical school, my good friend from Rochelle, his wife, his girlfriend really, what would become his wife, but she was in medical school and a good friend of Rosemary's, and she insisted, or both of them, that we double date that night, and that I'd be a blind date. Well, Rosemary's aunt came along and made sure this happened. Thanks to her, Rosemary and I met, and we dated every weekend, I guess you could say. That Sunbeam, I ought to have stock in that.
Right.
But we met in March. We married 30th of June.
Wow.
And then she helped me graduate. She worked for Oceanography Department.
Right.
And
for several years.
Yeah.
Evans Library, I think.
In the library,
she worked
and she
spacecraft oceanography.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned, I believe in the last show, that she's published her own history of Brazos Valley Italians.
Right. That's right.
In honor of her own heritage.
Right, and their history of her family, and she did a tape of all the ships that left Palermo, Sicily,
right,
with Italians, landed in New Orleans. Now, all the Italians from here practically came, their predecessors came from New Orleans over here. And many of their names are on the ship's logs. Well, Rosemary recorded all those for I don't know how many ships and for how many years, but a lot of them, and put them on tape, on a CD. And so they still sail. Birds of Passage, she calls it.
Birds of Passage.
Yeah. And
that's, you have 4 children, 7 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren.
Right,
I know that your you're proud of your whole family.
That's right. It's been something.
It has indeed. Your career, and I wish we had a whole nother show to talk
Yeah.
about your post-military career, but obviously it involved a lot of travel. For
Right.
10 years, you all spent most of that 10 years out
Right.
of the country.
We were 2 years in Syria, and 4 years in Botswana, 4 years in Lesotho, both of those in southern Africa. And then I had some short-term assignments, 3 months or so, in Iran, Pakistan, Somalia, and Ecuador, and Yemen.
Right.
And I kind of get upset. Nobody asked me anymore to take a consultancy or anything.
Eventually, you retired from the Texas Agriculture Extension Service at
That's
Texas
right.
A&M.
That's right. Because I had worked for them, and I had worked for the experiment station earlier, and I had enough time to retire.
Right.
And then also USDA Economic Research Service, and I was posted in the Ag Economics Department most of the time here.
Right. When you look back at your career and you sort of sum it up in your mind and your thoughts, obviously you're proud of your service and proud of the people you served with.
Right. And I've always liked to keep in touch.
Obviously.
And
Yes.
and people I know that I value, whose friendships I value. We've had South Africans visit us here from the Orange Free State, University of the Orange Free State. 2 different couples have come and visited with us. And
Cal Boykin, I want to thank you for your service.
Yeah.
We are out of time. Like I said, we could
Well,
spend
I appreciate it.
we
I
could spend a
certainly
lot
do.
of time, but you've had a remarkable life.
Okay.
And thank you. Cal Boykin's service, both as a gunner aboard his M8 Armored car and his post-World War II civilian service, is the kind of stuff of which our community can be forever proud. We salute him for his service as we salute all veterans. I'm Tom Turbeville. Please join us next time on Veterans of the Valley. I'll always remember this one. This will be good. This is a great book. All right. Okay, let's look at that camera. Here we go. This is actually the same, Kyle, this is the same one as last time, but I'm going to go ahead and do it for you again so you'll have it on the same tape. Okay? Okay. Actually, I think it's a little bit different. But anyway, here we go. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion was attached to Patton's Army during the Allies' final push through Europe at the end of World War II, and College Station's Cal Boykin was a gunner riding high on an M8 armored car, a historian, an author, a soldier. We will wrap up our visit with Cal Boykin on Veterans of the Valley, Friday at 8:30, Saturday and Sunday at 6:30, right here on KAMU TV.
Very good. One more round time at the top with the safety.
Okay.
That was good timing.
Good. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion was attached to Patton's Army during the Allies' final push through Europe at the end of World War II, and College Station's Cal Boykin was a gunner riding high on an M8 armored car, a historian, an author, a soldier. We wrap up our visit with Cal Boykin on Veterans of the Valley, Friday at 8:30, Saturday and Sunday at 6:30, right here on KAMU TV.
That's it.
He's going to give us a final, everything's okay.